What's the dumbest rule your school ever enforced? 1. Not being allowed to wear hoodies, jackets, or sweaters that lacked the official school logo. I was a high school teacher for several years. Both buildings I worked in were freezing, and having admin pull students out of my classroom during a 50-minute period and giving them detention instead of letting them learn is cruel and completely unnecessary, in my opinion. 2. My school had 3 staircases along a very long corridor. We were banned from using the middle staircase because it got overcrowded, and the ban was lifted once they realized it only made the other 2 staircases just as crowded. 3. If you throw snowballs, you get a 1-day suspension. The first long weekend after a snowfall, everyone would throw snowballs to get an additional day added to the long weekend. 4. You had to wear your ID around your neck on a rope thing. Then the choking started. 5. Candy canes were outlawed because you could sharpen them to a point and use them as a shiv. I went to school in rural Washington. We definitely weren't somewhere that shankings were to be expected. 6. I got Saturday school for missing a day of classes when I was 16. Seems reasonable, except I missed to go complete my U.S. citizenship and officially become a citizen alongside my mom. It took us 12 years to go through the legal process. BTW. Whole other issue. I had a note from my mother as well as a signed official federal form they give you to explain to school employers why you were absent. Apparently the only acceptable absence excuse was illness. I got punished for becoming a citizen. 7. Elementary school principal banned talking at lunch. If you were caught talking or even signing to someone, you had to go sit by yourself on a folding chair with no table. There was this one time my mom came to eat lunch with my older sister and I. The principal was like, "Oh, you should go eat out in the hallway with your daughters," and she was like, "Nah, I'm gonna sit here with my daughter and her friends and talk to them and enjoy their presence." Usually if a parent came for lunch, the student could invite one friend to join, unless you had siblings. Then it was too many people, so you couldn't invite a friend. Anyway, one of my older sister's friends whispered to my mom that she was going to move so she wouldn't get in trouble for talking. This was in a 9-year-old. 8. That if you say do anything back to your bully, it becomes a mutual conflict and isn't bullying. So if they start calling you slurs and making you feel bad every day, and you call them stupid once or twice, the school probably won't help. Also, dress code required school branded hoodies. They were $50. If you wore a non-school hoodie, you got in-school suspension. 9. After 9/11, my school instituted a zero-tolerance policy on bullying and violence. What 9/11 had to do with bullying? I don't know. Anyways, Halloween 2001. I dressed up as the guy from Clockwork Orange. He carries a cane around. The principal pulled me aside, told me walking around with a cane could be a weapon. Therefore, just walking with it is an act of violence, and suspended me for a couple of days, telling me that after 9/11, we don't mess around with that kind of stuff. Edit. This happened in Quebec, in a small town. 10. The new principal made a morning roundup rule where anyone arriving to class after the last bell had to go to the cafeteria and listen to a lecture about not being late for class. This took about an extra 15 minutes, making the students even more late to class than they would have otherwise been. Needless to say, everyone hated it. Even the teachers. That principal didn't last long. 11. Toilet paper rationing. This was in 1997, 1998. BTW. Apparently the high school girls' room was going through too much toilet paper, so the dean, a woman, stood outside the door and distributed a few squares of 1-ply institutional toilet paper to us as we went in. If she noticed toilet paper on the floor, our ration got cut down. If we asked for more for bigger jobs, we were told to save it for home. There were several episodes of girls stuck in stalls until friends could beg for more TP because of period messes or unexpected bowel incidents. The dean wouldn't even hand it over. She would go in the bathroom and pass it a few squares at a time over the door. If you didn't catch it as it fell and it landed on the floor, well, that's your fault and you're not getting more. If you used more than she thought necessary, tough luck. Go to class with bloodshed on your body. It took about a week of extremely angry parents coming to the school and calling both the school and the school board. But we finally got our toilet paper back, unlimited. How did we celebrate? By TPing her car. Of course. 12. We were not allowed to have facial hair at all. Like to the point where the principal would walk around during lunch with razors and shaving cream and do stubble checks. Absolutely ridiculous, and he would send tons of us to the bathrooms to shave during lunch, no matter how small the stubble was. 13. It wasn't really the rule that was dumb, but the reason for it. In my last year of high school, the school issued a rule that all students had to wear student IDs. If you didn't, you had to immediately go and pay for another ID. While you can see how many students may have saw this a way to skip class, the reason for this was the school shootings that happened the previous year. The reasoning was that it would be easier to spot who's a student and who's not a student, to then see who has malicious intent, except that most shooters were students. So, 14. My school was in a poor area of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Not a lot of schools here have money for anything. Because of a huge donation of books at the time I was in school, my school got an absurd number of books, including expensive ones. There were a few dumb rules, but the dumbest of them all, we basically couldn't touch the books in the library without permission. It might sound reasonable at first, but check this out. The library was huge, and there were lots of books, including contemporary classics, nonfiction like The Last Problem, English literature like Infinite Jest, How to Kill a Mockingbird, and whatnot. Dude, there was so much there. That place was probably the most valuable place in the entire school. I mean, it was awesome. There were enough books there for each student to lend about 100 every day. Here's the problem. The library went all but untouched for the entirety of my time there. Why? The amount of work it took to read one of those books was ridiculous, and pretty much made sure not a single student bothered to try. First, you couldn't take any of the books home, period. Forget the fact that they had your address and all your parents' info, so in the case that someone took it and didn't return it, they could just get it back. It had happened before, at least once before the rule was made. Second, you couldn't leave the library with them, no matter what. Third, if you wanted to read the book, you'd have to do it in the library at the lunch break, which was about 45 minutes, so unless you weren't hungry ever, you had only a few minutes to go to the library. It was only open for a few hours around the break, and not at all at any other time, so unless you stayed there for hours until the break for the afternoon classes, you just wouldn't have another chance. Those hours around the break could be used for you to be tutored by a teacher, which almost never happened. Fourth, once you went through all of that, you could only read the book under the observation of the people that volunteered to work in the library for credit, which was never more than 2 or 3 people. Sometimes no one. Which means that if you got there and there were already 3 people there, forget it. Unless you were willing to read it standing up close to where the book was kept, and even then they'd check on you every minute or so. Fifth, you couldn't get inside the library with a backpack, with food, in groups, speaking, without the appropriate uniform. You couldn't get in with the gym one, for instance, with other books, earrings, necklaces, or anything that could make noise while you were walking. Some were reasonable, but the issue was that one simple mistake and you would get banned. Sixth, any banishment from it was permanent. I complained about it once in the second year and was never allowed inside ever again. I even tried to get some teachers to help me, but it didn't work. Seventh, and probably the dumbest, only the students that had a certain amount of high grades could get any book at all. If you got something like 4 out of 10 on your last biology exam, you couldn't even get inside the library. The standard was so insane. Only 6 other students and I in my classroom had enough good grades to get books. In all my time there, the library was basically deserted for the majority of it. I tried to go there many times, but it was too much work. Out of all the books, I only managed to read 2 Brazilian ones in A Guerra do Lanche, The Lunch War, and Blackout, which I remember to this day in details. There were times where I legit thought about straight up ditching class to read some of them. I tried to get more, like The Last Problem, Kafka's Metamorphosis, Ulysses, which I know I wouldn't have been able to do it, but I was just curious. A Brief Story of Time, Wuthering Heights, etc. But the amount of work it took was so much that it was just almost impossible to be able to read more than 1 or 2 books a year, and even that took dedication, because I basically had to sacrifice part of my lunchtime. The rumor was that the principals, we had more than one, basically saw us as savages who would destroy the books if we were allowed to touch them, and even though they had no reason to believe so, the library worked well without those restrictions a year before I had gotten there, with only minimal incidents, and even those didn't result in the books getting destroyed. TLDR, my school made it very hard to read the huge amount of books they had. 15. went to school during the time where health and safety suddenly started going crazy. They introduced a no contact under any circumstances rule, that is, no touching another person. We were like 6 or 7 years old. Suddenly one day, not only is tag suddenly illegal, but they actually enforced it. I remember one day like 70% of the school's population was pulled off of the playground and made to sit on the floor in the hall for the crime of just playing the games that children play. 16. In grade school, we weren't allowed to play on the playground equipment when it snowed. Eventually, we weren't allowed to play with snow or even go near it. I got in trouble for sitting in snow. This was in Minnesota, where it snows half the year. Recess basically consisted of milling around the blacktop for 30 minutes. 17. Banned all bags on campus. Students were expected to somehow carry everything they needed in hand. This was especially challenging if you had a non-ideal locker placement. Ours did this too, because in college they won't let you carry your bags everywhere. Fucking liars. College professors don't give a shit. 18. Don't let your underwear show. This was directed in the girls when Madonna was in fashion. One school official went to war on visible bra straps. While no girls even attempted copying Madonna, this official was making a preemptive attack. She made announcements and would bust girls in the halls. About this time, the varsity boys basketball team got new uniforms. Rather than spend money on the other teams, their old uniforms were given to the junior varsity girls team. Jerseys with huge arm and neck holes made for 17-year-old boys were now being worn by 15-year-old girls. Girls that were as active as possible and in public. If they posed for a picture, you could almost not see their bras. While playing, the front of the jerseys flopped from side to side. At least one cup would be visible at any time. Suddenly girls basketball got a lot more popular. 19. Rule. No duct tape on clothing. Reason. Some girls thought they could get past the no ripped jeans rule by covering the tears with duct tape. It became a fad and everyone started doing it, so it got banned. A kid in my AP literature class found a loophole and made an entire outfit out of red and black duct tape. I mean shorts, a t-shirt and a jacket and shoes. When the school tried to suspend him, they couldn't because the rule was no duct tape on clothes. It said nothing about clothes made out of duct tape. He won the argument and even wore the outfit a few more times to say fuck you to the school and principals. Lol. 20. Dildos were banned. The school never thought they would have to print those words. You would think it was a given. Until a senior bought 100 dildos and snuck them around the school every day for 2 weeks straight.